Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Jan Clifton-Gaw. So we are together for an undisclosed project, I believe, as we
Yes,
kind of
indeed.
move through here. Um, Erin, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Because there's two of you and one of me, and we'll kind of go around our.
Yeah, that works. So I'm Erin Suida. I'm a second year physical therapy student here at ISU. And like I said, I'm from Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Caleb. We're both in the same class here, so we're both second years. So I'm from Fishers, Indiana, which is, I think, close to where you are at, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. I'm going to fly right through there. I'm Jan Clifton-Gaw, athletic trainer for a long, long time. And I'm in the DAT program at Indiana State, cohort 25. So I've got another year and a half. Living in Anderson, which is just up the road from Fishers. I'll be driving through tomorrow to go to Butler. I teach at Butler, as well as I'm an athletic trainer in Northern Hamilton County, Hamilton Heights. Hence the orange. I just got off work. So
Okay.
kind of gives you an idea. So I think we have a script that we're supposed to go through. Did you guys get a script as well, or?
We have a list of questions to kind of guide our discussion. I'm pulling that up right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have essentially what it kind of looks like is we're starting out just talking about basically our practice responsibilities as PT.
Okay. All right. So because you're up first and on my list, would you guys like to explain what your practice responsibilities are, and your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That works.
Go ahead and go, Aaron. To kick this off, and then you jump in whenever. But so as PTs, essentially we like to say neuromusculoskeletal experts. They used to say MSK, musculoskeletal experts in general, but I think that's kind of phasing out a little bit, and now we're including that neuro part in there to include more of the human body because we do see kind of the whole patient, whole person as opposed to surgeon. Let's see an ankle or foot or be a specialist in one area. But I think what's cool about both of our professions is we do see so. But we're really just treating impairments and identifying functional limitations that a patient or a client might have. And that's really what we're targeting and going after. And so that's our primary goal is to return the patient to by addressing any impairments they have. Aaron, you got anything to add to that?
I would just say, I had something in my head that I was gonna say. Um, I lost my train of thought. I think just in terms of, like education, I think that's a big thing we've talked about in every one of our classes, especially in neuro right now, and promoting health and wellness as a whole entirety and like lifestyle, and making recommendations that are in our scope of practice, whether that's nutrition or things that we can give advice on. But other than that, I think treating impairments is kind of our big takeaway and things we like to promote, like no matter the setting that we're in.
So I think ultimately our professions, even though they can be at odds with each other on occasion, historically, we're very similar in our wishing to make the person whole, um, prevent if we can, even though our world, because typically, as I'm sure I know Aaron understands this, and Caleb, I'm assuming you understand the functions of an athletic trainer. Whether have you ever experienced care from an AT?
I personally, I don't think that I have.
Okay.
Um, Maybe one time in high school, I remember, but definitely not like Aaron has being a coach.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the way to maybe define athletic training as a parallel but branched out extension of neuromuscular care. I had relationships with patients prior to seeing something traumatic happen. Generally speaking, that's not always true. In industrial medicine, that doesn't necessarily happen, but certainly we try to make sure that we know the individuals who are in our care prior to them having a problem. We have better emergency management of their care, which might be a little bit different than you guys from an acute setting. We see some pretty horrific things sometimes, and have to get them to that higher care pretty quickly. And where we can sometimes excel is sometimes, not every athletic trainer will do this, but really work on healing tissue, but then exceeding their previous limits. I'm a CSCS as well, so my whole career, those two things have run in tangent. If I can stop something happening by someone being very conditioned, strong, balanced, uh, that's the ideal. I would rather be very unbusy in public for having to deal with an injury that I could have prevented. Just say that. So, um, our responsibilities again are a little bit broader than yours are initially, but we don't have maybe the depth that you have. That might be the best way to describe it. So we cast a very wide net in care. You guys are very deep with what's very deep from even a tissue standpoint and how the body functions. I hate to say we're more practical. That's not necessarily the right terminology, but we need to have functionality. That's a better word of our people, and trying to restore their capabilities and their mental health is really important to us in doing that. So sometimes we do some things we maybe push our luck and shouldn't, to try to help deal with that wellness, that whole person, instead of just you're the shoulder dislocation. So I think probably for both of us, our next kind of key point, the limits of your job as a PT that would have you collaborate. What, whether that's education or physical capability. I mean, you can't be everywhere, nor can I. So, what do you guys see as is that would prompt you to work in a collaborative setting?
I think a lot of what we discuss from the start of PT school to where we're at now, and we won't stop discussing until we graduate, is like, when is the right time to and who is the right person to refer. And so I think one thing that's kind of interesting is the overlap between, like you mentioned, you have a CSS. I think that's really cool. It's something I'm interested in. And a lot of PTs are interested in it too. And I think it's cool and it's overlap there, because that could be an area of referral for a lot of our patients, especially if we're.
Absolutely.
So, like, are you seeing personal training while you're coming to me for PT, or after your athletic training session? Other than myself, are you seeing it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Knowing who that person is and what they're doing in their time that they're not with you is super important. But then, more medically speaking, when to refer to a doctor for red flags or something that's not more visceral or organ related that we're not as super important. I think that's primarily what I think of when it comes to referring.
I think in terms of like medication or those sorts of questions, I think we have to understand kind of the limits of our job, and when we have to be able to understand when we know we can't answer a certain question, and to not try and like expand our knowledge in something that we don't have like a scope for. So I think Caleb kind of covered most of our limits, but yeah, looking out for red flags, even yellow flags. But again, that goes along with education. We can still inform the patient on what we know, but then leave them to someone else to take over. I think that's about it.
I think I will mimic what you're saying, both of you, and that there comes a point in time, especially our training, formal education. And again, I'm gonna date myself. It's been 30 years. I've been certified now for 33 years. And we did very little neural education. So that is a huge difference in our presentation and how we look at care and so forth. And I even noticed some of that in my peers, generational peers that are physical therapists that only have a BS. Um, they really miss some of the depth that could be very important, that would differentiate our professions and really complement. Um, I think one of the limits that I have is time, and I do not have the capability to have patients coming in and out all day. I don't have access to most of those students during the day, nor do I really want them to be coming in. They need to be in school learning. So I have a very short amount of time to triage a lot of people. So most of my rehab gets slammed between that initial get everybody out to practice, and we're going to try to quick do what we can rehab wise. And then we have an event that needs management and care and so forth. So, and I think, God bless some of the people that I work with here in central Indiana. They're generally very respectful of my profession, but they think in September that I can do a soccer player's ACL rehab. Absolutely not. There is no time for that because I'm one. And when I looked today, when I left on our final forms emergency medical records, I have in our school district over 1,000 athletes, kids participating in something that they've signed up for. Now, I don't see all of them. I don't see the sixth to eighth graders unless there's something that's really horrible in the part-time individual who's at the middle school doesn't feel comfortable managing that. She does. She's really the individual that's there now is also a PTA. So she's very good about a lot of things. But my limitation becomes the depth of the care and quite frankly, the knowledge. If they're not pretty mobile, I don't have the um, time or access to a lot of the tools to really do right by them. People are constantly interrupting me, and that's not good patient care when we're really trying to focus on the plateaus and comfortable spots of some rehab. So I have no problem with shipping out things that I know that I could probably do quite well, but that's not why I'm there, and I'm very acutely aware of what my setting and what I need to be there doing.
So you as an AT, obviously all PTs are different from other PTs and all ATs are different from other ATs. Can you describe a little bit about what your routine looks like outside of school and everything? How like what you do might differ from another AT, like
Okay. So my practice, my actual
yeah.
practice. I am a big fan of not taping if I can avoid it. Not that I can't, not that I spent my entire career doing that, and I still taped an ankle today. But I would much rather, that's not evidence-based practice, but it's a cultural practice, and sometimes I end up choosing my battle there. When you look at my clinical practice, you're like, gosh, you tape a lot in the fall, especially with soccer because the cleats are terrible and braces don't fit. And culturally, they're like, well, go get your ankles taped. And without fighting with those other people, even though every year we have the conversation, that's not the best care. It's like, well, they did it for me. I should be able to do it. And it's sometimes I have to pick and choose my battles on my care. But that is not necessarily a detriment with some of the other things we do. Usually we can get what I'm going to call treatment light done in about a half an hour for most people. This time of year, we're usually managing about 20, 25 individuals in and out from a flow in that short amount of time. Then we can actually spend more time. We have an individual who's about 8 weeks post-op ACL reconstruction and a fractured radius that they had to reposition her radial head, and we're ending up doing some detailed rehab after the fact. But then the reason I'm there and the reason the school corporation has most of us and will pay our school, the school will pay the entity in this state, the healthcare system typically, or a clinical setting for our time is for liability. I hate to say that, but I'm well aware that that's what they're mostly concerned of. They want to make sure that I am visible at the event. So that if I'm trying to think, boy, if we just had 10 more minutes to do this, and this technique, it would be much better for that person. The whole is, and even the way the contract reads, it seems so I'm multifaceted. It's not just that I can provide excellent care to one person or 8 people or 10 people a day, whatever that looks like. It's a lot broader. The other difference might be that we're working 6 or 7 days a week, which kind of is tough. We're second shift, most of us that work in secondary ed, just because that's when the student athletes are being active. But that's not always true. Some of the larger schools actually will practice in the mornings too. So they'll need a secondary staff member to do that. So almost like a small college. Like I think of Carmel. I don't think Fishers does that. I know their staff there. But when they're doing things in the morning too, they need to have equality of care, or equity of care as a case. Does that help explain what things look like a little bit?
Yeah, I think you kind of answered the next question we
Okay.
talked to you, which was in the settings. Service. So
right. So that's where I'm currently at. Before we moved back to Indiana from Illinois, excuse me, I'd worked professional hockey downstate in Danville, and that was a whole different thing of emergency first aid was a lot of that. And because of the dynamics of the organization, if you were a long-term rehabilitation, you were gone, you went home. These individuals didn't live there, so they would come in and out, and I didn't do a whole lot of rehab at that point. Some athletic trainers are like that, especially when you're working in that paid position, and if you're not if you aren't valuable for the team in that moment, they move you out. So we just don't see them. They end up spending their time in a more managed care elsewhere, and then we deal with them once they come back. In college settings that I've been in have been a whole variety of very formal system at IU and how we manage them on site to at the community college in Illinois. They didn't even have any protocols about anything. It was pretty much Wild West free for all on how we manage things, which was horrible. So broad range. We don't have the structure, generally speaking, although we're doing a whole lot better. That was a quick 30-year arc I just made, but we're doing better overall. What do you guys see your settings as being when you do start your own official professional careers? And what do you see to be what's your day going to look like? Because I know today it's a lot different than what it will be. Up, Erin froze, so she's coming back on.
Yeah, I was waiting for
Okay, so we're gonna have some echoing. Okay, so I've muted frozen Erin. And now we have you.
Yeah, I'm trying to get out of that one. I don't know what's happening with my Zoom.
It's okay. Zoom is funky sometimes. So Caleb, how do you see your practice in 5 years from now? What does your day look like? What do you perceive it to look like?
Well, it's funny because we've been on one clinical routine
Hmm.
as second. That one clinical for most of us was the hospital.
So,
And I think for a majority of us, a lot of us, that's not where we see ourselves ending up. So, to better answer that question, I would need to wait until I've done the rest of my. We have a neuro clinical coming up this summer. It'll be a lot of inpatient rehab with strokes and spinal cords and things of that nature, and then we have a fourth clinical after that. Um, but that's a great question because you just don't know until you see it all. I think a lot of people are very outpatient minded, very similar to what you're having day-to-day basis, but there's so many different avenues down. I'd say the big you're working in a hospital in the acute care setting, in the neuro population or the outpatient. Aside from those three, I think there's some more niche areas that you could find, like pediatrics is one, and there's a public health, and there's quite a few. But for me personally, I love orthopedics, and I'm minded in that area. So, but the reality is, who knows?
that is very true. You don't know until you're exposed to it. So I understand. Aaron, what do you think? What do you envision your world being in 5 years?
I would just kind of mimic what Caleb said, but I think everybody, when they kind of first hear PT, they just think outpatient orthopedics, like the typical clinic, and that's kind of the fallback almost. But I like our class in that I feel like there's a lot of different interests, and not everybody kind of just to that. So I think, but I like agree with him in that we have to wait through these clinicals and just use our choice one as best we can, and kind of go from there and see what we like, see what we don't, and just kind of play around with it. But that's the good thing about PT is that you don't have to pick right away what you want to go into. You don't have to go into a fellowship or residency right away. So kind of versatile in that way. But I think sports is something I'm definitely interested in just because of my background. And if I can get that for my choice and just have 6 weeks to be exposed, see that for the future, that'd be awesome. But I agree. I like orthopedics as well. And I just think they're very creative people in our class. And when we have those type of classes to come up with exercises and sims and stuff, I think we're very good in that way. And that would be an exciting thing to go into to try and change what PT seems as right now is just kind of like same thing. People get burnout from doing that. So to look at it in a different way would be great.
I would love to have that collaboration with creativity if coming from that rehab setting. It is very difficult to manage that active population that is used to variety in what they're doing. And they're like, well, I did my 3 sets of 10. I'm like, okay, well, how many times are we gonna do little arms here, guys? Let's do something else. Um, and I understand that tissue has to heal, but let's challenge them different ways, at least something every day, to keep them engaged and for your all's perspective, to keep the patients coming in the door. Mine are probably always going to come in the door, although we could have a whole nother discussion about what happened during COVID, but that's a whole nother nightmare I don't want to bring up today. Um, but the reality is, I mean, we aren't in that model of reimbursement the way you guys are. So it's a whole different, I have a standardized population that we treat what comes through the door, and you guys have to build your practices. So that's a little different scenario between the two professions, I think. Although we're trying to do more pay for service kind of things, but those people are few and far between right now. that will do that. Degree requirements. Okay. Today, you probably maybe have even had some coursework with master's level individuals. We have entry level masters now. I think we've had that education creep happen in our profession, and it's not a bad thing. We've had a massive concern of our entire population of athletic trainers is we're losing a lot of early mid-career people, because maybe they didn't go through the rotations like you guys are getting ready to see, and see a lot of different things and really decide, hey, this is for me, this isn't for me. And they're young, they were young. I mean, we had it was bachelor's, you went through a program. Probably for the last 15, 20 years, you've had to go through an accredited program for bachelor's, and then you would sit and take your exam and then try to get licensed. A lot of people in my generation of graduating in the early 90s did choose to get master's degrees. And I think that was kind of our ceiling at the point. So our basement today, or our entry level today, had been our ceiling. Very few people my age would have gone and gotten a PhD, unless you knew you were going to be teaching on the collegiate level. It wasn't, there was no need to, I think is probably the best way to say that. And now the DAT credential is essential because of the depth that we need to be thinking about providing care, instead of just, well, Vince Stilger, the athletic guy, and I love Vinny, but Vince Stilger, the athletic trainer, it was at Indiana State back in the late 80s and, into 91. He did it this way. So I have to do it this way because he did it that way. Those days are over. I think that's been a blessing for our profession to step up and not just emulate what our mentors were doing, but to really start thinking about what we're doing and advancing our practice and doing better. For everyone, as the case might be.
Can you touch on a little bit kind of how your practice has shifted from bachelor's to master's, doctorate, how that changes how you practice and what you're learning from a master's doctorate?
Okay, so I'm gonna have to show my age. When I graduated from Indiana State in 91, from a bachelor's perspective, there we were very modality driven. I think that's why I chose to get my CSCS, because having been an I woman like Erin is, um, exercise was key, and exercise is key, and that's going to be the way we transform the entire medical system in North America, is really embracing that and getting people moving. So I digress a little bit, but most of my cohort, they didn't really, you know, we knew Dr. Knight's DAPRI, daily adjustive um, progressive resistive exercise. Great. You had put a 5-pound weight on and they did the cardinal planes of the ankle motion, and woo, they could do that pretty easy. So we put on 7.5 the next day, to show the percentages and the increase and so forth. And that was it. When I transitioned to the master, knowing that there was more out there was more diversity out there, I think that's what really, I was blessed to be, able to go to IU and be on staff there for a year and learn from a lot of culturally rich people from all over the United States. And we had several people from the Far East that were there. So having that exposure just like opened up the world. And it really depends on, at that time, who your mentors were and who your preceptors were. Now that's what we would call them, as to what you were experiencing and what you felt comfortable doing. We had a very narrow range of restrictions, I think is probably the best way to look at it, as to what we were teaching and doing. And there was a lot of expansion individually, but that didn't happen. So, fast forward through life and today, I've done more research and writing in the last 6 months than I had in the last 25 years. That's just the nature of the beast. And I'm sure that if you would ask people who were just coming out of the master's programs that are in our cohort, you've been paired with one of them, they would say, yeah, we basically, did a publishable document and that kind of thing. And that was very rare for a master's level person. Those people went on to get PhDs if they were going to go that route. We wrote the first 4 chapters of a project in my program. So it has evolved, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there's been some unfortunate realities about it, in that they threw us in, guys, where you have very structured things. Okay, well, guess what? You're the senior with women's basketball. Call me if something breaks. And I was the senior with women's basketball at Indiana State. Yeah, you're like, what? Yeah, that really happened. Um, so it's a lot different, better, better. So I think the one thing I would encourage you is to have these kinds of conversations with whomever you're working with, and find out exactly what their frame of reference was prior to um, going through. And again, you guys are a threat to us because you're new and you have all these new skills and you have all this energy, and we've seen a lot of stuff that hasn't worked well and we're cranky. And uh, so finding out what our experience was education wise, I still have 2 people I work with who only have a bachelor's, and they have no intention of going back to school, which is a shame. Only doing the bare minimum of continuing ahead. So did I kind of answer that well enough?
Absolutely.
Today's a lot different than what it has been, but you're going to be exposed to people who had a less formal education than you have today, who are going to be your supervisors. They could be. That's kind of that just is the nature of the beast, I guess, of age.
So I know in PT, we've discussed the newly added legislation of direct access. Is that similar with athletic training?
No, because we function in the state of Indiana, and we just had our Practice Act revised. That happened this past summer. And we work under the direction of a physician or a DO. It doesn't have to be. Some people will sneak in a DC on occasion, but because we're under their license, whatever they're comfortable with us doing, we'll do it. Since I've been here in Central Indiana, I've had physicians who didn't want us doing a lot of things, which that was their purview. We're working under their license. And most recently, I've had somebody, oh yeah, I've reduced an elbow dislocation. I'm like, in the field with no diagnostics whatsoever, you want me knowing where those nerves are to just freewheel and reduce an elbow? I'm like, absolutely not. I'll do fingers and thumbs and toes and some shoulders on, those are pretty easy, but absolutely not. And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, no, not without diagnostic stuff, because so much can go wrong. I'm not in a hospital setting. And if I end up occluding blood flow, it could be 25 or 30 minutes before they're anywhere that somebody can fix them. So I'm like, absolutely not. Yeah.
Well, that sounds
I don't know what else I need to answer for that.
Other than school,
Mhm.
what kinds of interprofessional stuff in your daily life? I guess your personal examples are better than anything else since you're currently practicing.
Yeah, since I'm a late career person, I know. Um, Personally, I've spent a lot of time on the Indiana Athletic Trainers Association's executive committee, not as a individual who has been up for a voting position, but as committee member for several different important pieces that needed some continuity. Uh, Worked quite intimately with our board of certification that's in Omaha, Nebraska, with continuing ed advances. We're still in the process of that. So nationally and uh, certainly locally from a oversight membership kind of setup, and then our certification board. From a personal thing, and one of the cool things that I've gotten to do, and I hope that if you guys have both identified orthopedics, but here locally, this is the amateur sports capital of the world, and having had multiple national governing bodies, NGOs here in Indianapolis, and being able to work with their national teams and do international events, and that that capability of dealing with that high end, and then being able to take those interactions and skill sets and bringing them back to the people that I deal with and the communities that I've dealt with. Um, it's pretty important and interesting, and it keeps my practice vibrant. So, it makes life fun and exciting. I'll just say that.
Sounds like all you're involved in on top of school keep your life spicy.
Well, yeah, it school was a long off situation for me for a variety of reasons. Parents pass away unexpectedly. You start your life and life gets away from you pretty quickly, and um, we've been together for 29 years. I mean, there's things, and you're like, I don't. The conversation I'd had with my wife was, I don't know that you're going to like who I'm going to be for the next 2 years. I mean, that was a very honest thing. It's like, okay, well, we need to do this, and we're doing it. I'm well aware that I'm not going to be 65 years old throwing 80-pound coolers around. That's not going to happen. And that seems like forever, guys, but that's really a blink of an eye. And you're like, oh, I can't mobilize everybody the way I used to anymore. I've got to figure out a different way because my hands hurt all the time. That's going to be your world doing orthopedic stuff. Um, so that's what drove my return. So, yeah, but it's okay. You have to. The only way to make a profession better is to get involved, and a lot of people are more likely to jump on social media today and complain about stuff instead of getting their hands dirty and doing the work. And you know, choosing to maybe not be the figurehead, but being the people boots on the ground is very important because we have to get work done to make things better.
Well, through all the hard stuff, and we salute you for still continuing your education and furthering the progress, athletic training, and healthcare in general. So
Yeah, I can't even imagine sitting where you two are, where you have your whole. I'm jealous because you have your whole world. Like, I might want to do neuro today, and I kind of like, the IMS. So I'm going to work with IndyCar. They have some pretty unique challenges that they deal with, from neural training needs to occur so they live in the car. I mean, it's terrible to say, but there's some things that they have to have some assistance with, especially as they age. But back on track so we can finish on time here. Um, this idea of interprofessional collaborative practice, what does that look like for you guys today? I know that you've only had the one um, clinical experience so far. What was good about that clinical experience and what was like cringeworthy?
I think something that was great was just being in acute care. I don't think it would have been the same in a SNF personally, but I know a decent amount of our classes in one of those. But I think acute care allowed us to communicate with nurse practitioners, nurses, LPs, OTs. I think I was with an OT almost like every single day that I was on my clinical. So that was awesome to get to work with other students as well. Um, we got to talk to physicians and be in the same room, kind of like hear their rounds. And so I don't think that's something that I've ever seen. So getting to do a treatment session and kind of see them do their thing before we go in and do our thing and work with patients was awesome. And get to see their notes and document ourselves and just kind of get a feel for what that looks like in the hospital. Um, but again, it kind of depends on the setting. So
Absolutely, it depends on the setting. You're spot on because the hospital is very regimented and everybody's wearing I leave my badges in the car, which I probably shouldn't do, but um, you're immediately identified by what that thing says. Did you notice that people treated you differently when it said do you, they don't have like student PT on there? How did they identify you on your ID badges?
I think it said like student physical therapist or like doctorate of student or physical therapy, like student or so, yeah, something of that nature. I don't know that everyone took a look at that, but
Did you
obviously
have
seeing us an
did you have
older individual.
a badge backer that would like you could immediately see like I'm a colonel because I have a you know a star major because I have the star lit thing on my I'm not I don't know have anybody in the army but I've got this on I'm very clearly identified. We in the hospital settings locally they'll all have we have hang tags behind our badges so you're an MD so if they say you better jump and this is an NP and this is a PA and this is an RN and oh, AT, what's that? Well, I figured during COVID, if the social worker got a backer badge, we needed to get one too because we were being treated very disrespectfully and with the job that we were given during the crisis. And I'm like, I don't like that at all. So I kind of got my hackles in a my hackles were up. I was cranky about a lot of that. I didn't think I hate to you want to have a collaborative practice where everyone respects each other and is very interested in what you have to say and what details you are skilled at. You do that, I'm going to do what I'm skilled at. We're going to make sure that this is the best care ever. And to have a medical assistant really talk down to me because we were taking temperature and doing door duty. I'm like, I need that badge backer because it is driving me crazy. You will respect me. I have a master's degree. I could do a lot of, if not everything that you can do, except maybe draw blood, and I can figure that out. And I got cranky about it. So um, there's errors in the whole system about that, and I think going in and talking about collaboration. That's kind of why I asked what was the cringiest thing that happened to you, Aaron, when you were a student doing your last clinical. It was like, ooh, I don't want to do that ever again, or I don't want to be treated like that ever again.
I don't know that I would say it happened to me, but I know, unfortunately, I feel like the reputation that like more so speech and OT had was that physical therapy had to be the one to see the patient. And I don't know if that was kind of like an unsaid thing for the PTs, but I just it was kind of the thing for PTs to be able to see the patient before OT to get them up and moving because that's our job and to make sure that we stick to that. And it just didn't come across as important for the OTs to see the patient, which was very unfortunate, especially to the physician. So
Mhm.
um, not so not so much for us, but I thought that was very interesting to see that mindset amongst all the staff there. So
Kayla, I want to come back to that because that's essentially important there. What did you experience some really awesome collaborative moments during your clinical experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that Aaron said was pretty much identical.
Hmm.
Um, I saw all the professions and we all collaborated with patients and various settings within the hospital, different units. Um, but one area where I actually got to work with ATs was when I was at for PT school, and I thought that was cool. Just saying, it was like we were doing the same thing. Like, if you call a patient this, they would be able to tell it different, right? Because like the rehab process is
Mhm.
essentially the same, right? So that was cool seeing how what we do is ingrained in us as healthcare professionals and taking care of the patient first, if you're doing it in the right way. So I thought it was cool seeing an AT in act. Just so
Yeah, yes, it is very true. And I think a lot of, again, where we started this conversation, um, we have a very broad domain that sometimes isn't very deep, and we fill in a lot of that lacking of depth by either taking an advanced degree or doing a lot of very targeted continuing education professionally to try to pick things up that so we can perform better care for our patients. Aaron, you said something that broke my heart, but I know it's true. People, second class citizens, and being treated when they are doing some of the most powerful work at restoring some of these activities of daily living. I mean,
Hmm.
just it's just brutal. Have you guys talked at all about why that may be that hierarchy? I mean, I have my opinions about it, but in your training, have you
I
talked?
don't know that we've I don't know that we've talked about it like in school, or I don't know if anyone else has kind of experienced that on clinicals or anything. But unfortunately, I feel like it might be because of education levels and the degree level. Like people see that um, like letters behind your name and just kind of assume that that's how it's supposed to go. Or
Mhm.
um, I don't know that they entirely know what goes into OT and physical therapy. Oh, like movement, exercise. They kind of assume that that's the go-to. Um, so I don't know if that's just kind of they don't care almost to look further into it. So that's on them, but also on us for educating them as well. Because I know there are plenty of times where I had to educate patients on what OT would provide that was different than us, and they'll be coming in to see them later, and but they're just as valuable. So I think that's something that should be touched on more. I don't think it was, but for sure.
Caleb, do you have anything to say about that? Thoughts as to maybe why the hierarchy? I think education is a huge part of it.
uh, yeah, I think just can you hear me?
Barely, you're coming in and out a little bit.
Or my computer a little closer. I was saying just the letters behind your name, unfortunately, play a role in that.
Hmm.
Because if you take all that away and an OT, a PT, an AT, and a nurse, I'll go in and treat a patient for the same thing, let's say. If you're competent at your job and you're putting the patient's needs first, they shouldn't be able to tell what the difference is really.
You're right. You're right.
So,
I think education was part of this great divide and mobilized advocacy on the part of the APTA. I mean, that's the reality, and working with certain state legislatures and really being very conscious. They were probably one of the first groups outside the AMA to really do that, and that leverage that front, and the person who gets there first gets to call the shots. That was the historically that's why we had to get to the moon first. Kind of who cares now, but we were there so we could call it. We get to control the narrative. So long time ago, previous PTs really dug in and did that for you guys. Um, what do you think is the most important aspect that we should establish to make sure that collaborative teams, from physicians all the way through the whole entirety of the medical team process? What are some important things we need to really focus on to make sure that it stays collaborative?
it depends on the patient. I mean, with an athlete, maybe you're saying, "Hey, let me get your athletic trainer's phone number."
Yeah.
Um, just being in contact with the people that they're seeing outside of your care, so that you have continuity.
I
Um,
I can't tell you how frustrating it is to have an individual come back and say, well, the trainer's going to do your program. Okay, well, first of all, I don't call you a therapist. Um, I would call you a physical therapist to my athlete. So athletic trainer or AT is much more appropriate. And what have you been doing with them, and what do you want? Where do we need to have this person? Like, we get nothing. Just go do your exercises. Okay, but what I'm going to do may be different than what you're doing. So I'm trying to find that continuity of care is hard. Communicate. I have communication written down here. I cannot impress upon you enough, and it's very difficult um, to do that after there's something crisis-wise happen for an athlete. In my case, and then they go away and they come back, and we haven't built that relationship to begin with. So once you guys do into a community, start working, sure you reach out and really repeatedly build that. Like, okay, it's once a quarter I need to call this person whether I've seen anybody from there or not. Just check on them. And it's not, hey, send me patients. Hey, how are you doing? Because we're on this team. We're a team taking care of this community, and that would make a huge difference, irregardless of what your practice ends up being, whether it's with us or with any other medical professional. It's very important. Erin, you're quiet. What are you thinking?
I would agree. I would say putting in the effort to reach out to those individuals in a timely manner. I know when I was working on my rehab with our primary AT, he would talk to the physicians almost every day, whether it was about athletes or not, or just get an update on what they're doing or what their schedule looks like. So I know he was putting in that effort to communicate with them pretty regularly, and forming that relationship with athletes and seeing what they need. Do I need to reach out to a PT? Because I know he set up many appointments for me to do PT and then come to AT after, and
Yep.
do different things with different individuals. So that was really helpful. And um, I would talk to the other ATs in there as well and just see what they were doing with their other athletes. And um, so communication's definitely up there, and just networking and putting your name out there and getting to know different people, because you might never know when you're going to need them or will reach out to them. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do you guys who okay, so I'm gonna play the teacher here for a minute. Who is the most important person when you're going into a doctor's office or facility that you need to leave a good impression with? What do you think?
us as the physical therapists,
Okay.
or who? No, I'm asking.
Oh,
Are you saying like if
yeah.
we as a physical therapist go
Yeah,
into?
you're trying to drum up business, you're trying to make a connection. Who's the most important person?
I mean, you want to say the doctor. That's the answer you think at first. But if you're asking this question, it can't be the doctor.
Nope, not even close. It's the person that's either answering the phone or the person who's at the desk,
Mm-hmm.
because they control access. And if you are difficult, if you're short with them, oh man, that that the higher the higher the level of care of the provider, the more important it is to have somebody controlling the gate. And if you disrespect that person at all, I mean, it is over. You're over. Um,
yeah.
no amount of food or flowers or anything to schmooze with them. You're over. So even something as simple as, I every time I step into Hinkle Fieldhouse, I will always um, have like a 30-second conversation with a security guy who most people will pass right by, and he is great. I mean, he's going to be the first one to stop somebody coming in to get us, but um, you know, I don't teach in there this semester, but I always whoever's there, the custodial staff, whoever it is, because they're the ones that really, wow, they were all nice to you, but that's not who they were. People you don't think they notice, but boy, they sure do. So, is there anything else we need to hit here? Oh, guess we've already done that.
No,
Patient.
I thought that was,
I just kind of want to touch on what, 'cause, I mean, I've seen an AT, like playing college soccer, but I just kind of want to know what other settings that you guys can
Oh,
work in, because I know we
yeah.
on our schools and everything like that.
We're seeing more and more individuals being used in the industrial setting, workplace kind of situations, because a lot of the a lot of our jobs today in North America go one of two ways. They're either sitting all the time or they're doing some really repetitive um, standing, walking, working with equipment that doesn't fit them because it's going to be used in the next shift. Um, Having people from an industrial setting that have to constantly be doing different things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but me picking up a 5 pound box at Tractor Supply Warehouse and me, moving a 200 pound box is a different thing, or, having to deal with a bag of food that's, 100 pound bag of food or whatever, a big bale of something, and it shifts, all of those kinds of things. So there's a huge wellness effort to put wellness clinics in those places. So instead of sending somebody to the industrial nurse, which is very rigid from an OSHA standpoint of nurse to the advanced care provider, whether that's an NP or uh, a physician, and then you guys may see them 6 weeks later after they've been off atrophying, and then it takes them forever to come back. And so trying to stem off some of that, um, there's very little that we're allowed to do because of OSHA on site, but we can do enough and enough education to really try to make people's lives better. So something that is avoidable, we can avoid. So that's been a huge um, push. I mean, it's cheaper to keep people healthy and working than to have to continue to find replacements and pay for their care. uh, you know, Ideally, I'm sure that, everybody thinks school settings, and that, that's where I've spent, this last part of my life. But, working with private organizations, um, working with our national governing bodies, working with the United States Olympic Committee, which is its own brand of weird, working in tangent with chiropractors in their offices. Um, Really depends on what state you're in. I mean, working out in California is a lot easier than some of the restrictions that we have here about manual therapy kinds of things we can do. Um, there are people who will do a lot of what we call tactical athletic training. So when we're talking about the military, sheriff's departments, police force, firefighters, the people, when you talk true first responders, that's who you're aiding. So instead of just having a medic, you have someone who can deal a little more efficiently with orthopedic injuries um, than what they're primarily trained to do, which is save their life. They're not trained to do more than put an ice bag on most people typically. So, again, keeping that those warriors who we've spent a lot of time training and are very skilled at what they're doing, working is important for a minor hamstring strain or something. We need to do that if we can. So that's another huge initiative that actually Dr. Games at Indiana State is involved in. I don't know if you've had any dealings with him. That was his dissertation. Was on that tactical athlete and firefighters, particularly, and getting them care, advocates for care. Really, basically, just about anything. Um, one of our people in our cohort actually works with a flag corps that travels with a marching band. So she's in charge of their medical care, their overuse injuries, and so forth. Um, so weather related problems all the way down to, my tuba doesn't is killing my low back kind of a thing. And some people will actually open their own clinic depending on what state you're in and what your license says, and they'll do, you know, a fee for service kind of scenario. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what our settings can be, and they're ever evolving.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else that you can ask of me? Anything?
That was a really juicy conversation. I think that was really beneficial to hear what you have to say, especially given all your experience. That was really cool.
Yeah,
And
it's
your
been a
side of
lot.
things.
Yeah, it's
Um,
been a lot.
thank
Um,
you.
you're welcome. So I don't know what our next step is going to be. I'm sure they will tell us. I think I get the impression that you guys will know on Friday, and we won't know until 5 a.m. on Monday. I call it
Probably.
our Groundhog Week begins at 5 a.m. on Monday, um, where everything gets dumped and we figure out quickly what we have to do. So
Awesome.
if you do find out something, you're more than welcome to get a hold of me a little earlier, and we'll see if we can collaborate with our schedules.
Will do.
All right,
Sounds
guys.
good.
Aaron, you've got this, and like I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'll process this, and I'll make sure that it's at least on the YouTube link. I don't know. Again, what do you guys have to submit?
Just the Zoom link, which honestly at this point I don't know if it's recorded because I had to switch to my phone, so I might end up needing that YouTube
Okay,
link.
perfect.
Uh,
We'll do it. We'll do it, and I may actually, and I'll send you that Zoom link too. Okay.
Thanks
awesome.
so much, Dan.
Cool. All right.
Thank you.
I'll see you guys later. Bye.
All right. Nice to meet you.
See
Good
you.
to meet you too.